For this video, we're going to focus on comparing decimals, trying to decide what is bigger and what is smaller. Now, there's really only one trick to comparing decimals, and that's going to be compare their place values. Now, to do that, let's go over the place values of the decimals we're going to be using, just to refresh it in our memories. Here, we have the decimal 1 and 457 thousandths. Each digit, the 1, the 4, the 5, and the 7, each digit has its own place value and has a different value as a result. The 1 is in the ones place value, so I'm going to put an O above it to symbolize the 1. The 4 is in the tenths place value. I'm going to put a T above it, but I'm also going to draw a little arrow for tenths. And that means that there are 10 pieces in every one whole. It would take me counting up to 10 to get me to one whole with this decimal place value. The 5 is in the hundredths place value. So I'm going to put an H above it for hundredths, and once again I'm going to draw a little arrow, hundredths. And it would take, as you might have guessed, 100 of these pieces to make one whole. Now our ones, our tenths, and our hundredths are kind of they are the same things we use for our money system. If you have $1, you have $1. The tenths is how many dimes you have. Each dime is worth 10 cents, and how do we write 10 cents? We write it 0 and 10, because it is worth 10 pennies. And the hundredths, well, that's exactly like our pennies. It takes 100 pennies to make one whole dollar, and we would write our pennies as 0.01. So we've got dimes, which is 10 cents, or just a 1 in the tenths place, and we have hundredths, or pennies, which is a 1 in the hundredths place. After that, we don't have a coin for the next place value, but our next place value is the thousandths. I'm going to put a TH up here for thousandths, and I'll spell it out for us. THOUSANDTHS. And if we had 10 pieces in the tenths, 100 pieces for hundredths, how many thousandths is it going to take to create one whole? Well, if you say 1,000, which is in the actual word, thousandths, you'd be correct. So we're going to focus on these 4 place values when we're comparing our decimals: our ones, our tenths, our hundredths, and our thousandths. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's start comparing some decimals. In this example, we're comparing 0 and 5 tenths to 0 and 3 tenths, and we want to know which one is bigger. To do that, we use the inequality symbols, greater than or less than, or if they're equal to each other, we'd use the equal sign. If you think about it, greater than means that something is greater than another, so the mouth opens up towards the bigger number. Less than, well, the mouth is opening this way, so the bigger number has to be there. And, well, we know what an equal sign is. We use that all the time. So we want to compare 0 and 5 tenths to 0 and 3 tenths. And the easiest way to do that is to compare our place values. If we start in the ones place, let me underline it. If we start in the ones place, what do we have? Well, we have a 0 and we have a 0. So the ones are exactly the same. We cannot decide yet if it's bigger or smaller. So we have to move to the next place value, the tenths. This has a 5, this has a 3. So which place value is bigger? Is 5 tenths bigger than 3 tenths, or is 3 tenths bigger than 5? Hopefully, you're going to agree that 5 is bigger than 3. So we would use the greater than symbol. 0 and 5 tenths is greater than 0 and 3/10. Let's try it with another. Here we have 0 and 2/10 being compared to 0 and 8/10. Once again, let's compare our place values. In the ones over here we have a 0, in the ones over here we have a 0. So we can't decide anything yet. We need to go to our tenths. Here we have a 2 in the tenths. Here we have an 8 in the tenths. They're different, so which one is bigger? Is 2 bigger than 8, or is 8 bigger than 2? And 8 is a bigger number than 2, so it's going to be less than. 0 and 2/10 is less than 0 and 8/10, because this is the bigger number. So the mouth opens to the bigger number. But what if we start having hundredths? Here we have 0 and 37 hundredths, and we're comparing it to 0 and 32 hundredths. If we start comparing our place values, we have zeros and the ones again, so that's not going to help us. We have 3 in the tenths for both of them, so that's not going to help us either. So we have to go to the hundredths. Here we have a 7 hundredths, and we have a 2 hundredths. What's bigger, 7 or 2? 7 is bigger than 2, so 0 and 37 hundredths is greater than 0 and 32 hundredths. Try this next one on your own. See what you come up with. Here we have 0 and 84 hundredths, and we're comparing it to 0 and 93 hundredths. Which one's bigger? Think about it. Compare your place values, and pause the video. If we compare our place values, we start off like before, zeros and the ones. That doesn't help us. Then we have an 8 in the tenths and a 9 in the tenths. Well, here's our difference. We actually don't even have to go all the way to the hundredths place value to decide. Since 8 is smaller than 9, we can say that 84 hundredths is less than 93 hundredths. We don't even have to go all the way to that last place value. It can be decided beforehand. What if I gave you this, though? Here we have 1 and 42 hundredths, and we're comparing it to 0 and 42 hundredths. Hopefully you're starting to think, hey, this 1 is bigger than the 0 in the ones place. So this place value, or sorry, this decimal, 1 and 42 hundredths, is greater than 0 and 42 hundredths. I didn't even have to look at my decimal place values. I just had to look at the 1 in the ones place and compare it to the 0 in the ones place. It can be that simple sometimes. Let's take a look at two more, and these will probably be the trickiest ones that we work with. Here we have 0 and 7/10, and we're comparing it to 0 and 35 hundredths. Now your initial reaction might be to say that 0 and 35 hundredths is bigger, because 35 has to be bigger than 7. But what you need to realize is this 7 in the tenths place and this 3 in the tenths place here, well, 7's bigger. And if you don't believe me, we can always add a 0 to the end of our decimal. It doesn't change the value, so instead of thinking of this as 7/10, we could think of it as 70 hundredths. But if we don't want to do that, compare your place values like we've been doing. 0 and 0, they're the same. 7 and 3. 7 is bigger than the 3, so 7/10 is greater than 0 and 35 hundredths. If you remember to compare your decimal place values, there's no decimals. You cannot decide which one is bigger than. I could give you something like this. 0 and 238 thousandths, and we can compare it to 0 and 354 thousandths. Doesn't matter that it goes all the way to the thousandths place value. We compare each digit and the place values, and we can decide that, oh, since I have a 2 in the tenths here and a 3 in the tenths there, 0 and 354 thousandths is larger. I hope you found this useful. Now get out there and compare some decimals.